The Irishman was a film I had been waiting for over 10 years. I had just become disillusioned with mainstream Hollywood, unhappy with the fact that they seem to just not be making mid-budget movies for adults anymore. Crime films seem to have disappeared. It was all remakes, reboots, and superhero movies. Add to that the fact that Al Pacino and Robert De Niro, two of my favourite actors, had seemingly disappeared into the abyss of C-grade cinema and direct-to-DVD nonsense, and my favourite living film director, Martin Scorsese, while still making brilliant films, had not really delved into the crime world he was so known for since Casino in 1995. So imagine my excitement when in 2007, Robert De Niro declared that he would be teaming up with his old friend Scorsese for another crime film, an adaptation of the best-selling mafia novel I Heard You Paint Houses, one that would not only bring back their old buddy Joe Pesci out of retirement, who had added so much fire to Scorsese's Goodfellas and Casino, but would star cinema legend Al Pacino, Marco Corleone, Scarface himself. This was my dream movie, one that I waited for so long, and then after an incredible amount of time, the film was finally released in 2019 to pretty much unanimous critical acclaim. I loved it, as many did, but perhaps more so than most, and with a bit of personal connection with what this film meant to me and the fact that I had waited so long for it. I mean, long-time subscribers of this channel will know that pretty much the entire YouTube channel at one point was dedicated to anticipating The Irishman. Anyway, now that the film has been out for a long while and we've watched and rewatched it, I wanted to do a countdown of my 15 favourite scenes from the film. This isn't taking into account the technical elements of the scenes or anything like that. It's purely subjective, and purely the scenes that I enjoyed the most. Now 15 sure sounds like a whole lot, but that's the thing with The Irishman. It's so long and so episodic that you could take 15 scenes you loved, as I did, and still be left with many that you've frustratingly had to leave out. This wasn't easy to do at all, and I made it harder for myself in general by picking specific scenes as opposed to small segments of the film. For example, I'm not going to say one of my favourite scenes is where Frank Sheeran is in prison with Russell Bufalino, because that would be too easy. I'd have to break it down into individual scenes, like say the part where they're playing bocce, when Russ and Frank are eating, and the wheelchair scene. So let's do this. Before I start, please consider subscribing if you haven't already done so and hitting the notification button for similar content. But I also want to do 3 honourable mentions and 1 dishonourable mention before I start the proper countdown. You want to guess what scene is the dishonourable mention? I bet you already know it, because it's by far the worst scene in The Irishman and one of the very worst scenes in Martin Scorsese's filmography. And it's that beatdown of the grocery store owner by De Niro's Frank Sheeran. It's such an awkward scene. De Niro's movement is so weird and stiff, and so many random things happen, like the glass smashing for seemingly no reason, and the grocery guy screaming hysterically in pain when De Niro's stamp really doesn't look that bad. At one point, De Niro's feet movement is so awkward it actually looks like he's forgot which foot he's supposed to be attacking the guy with and used the wrong foot. It's such a clumsy scene, and it doesn't help that it's shot from a wide angle so we see everything, all the clumsiness in its glory. The guy on the floor could have easily rolled away, gotten up and went for a stroll whilst Grandpa De Niro positioned himself for the only couple of stamps he can muster, all whilst the grocer hollers in pain. Even the famous Billy Bat's Goodfellas beatdown was shot in close-ups. But I've said enough about this scene in previous videos. You can check out a video I did called The One Scene in The Irishman Everyone Hates for more of my thoughts on it. So my first honourable mention is the ending of the film. A wonderful scene. Quiet, melancholy, sad, and completely without melodrama. Frank Sheeran's death is approaching, and there are no mob men surrounding him. No union officials toasting each other in celebration of the upcoming Christmas. No Russell Bufalino to break bread with. Not even any of Frank's daughters there to keep him company. The final shot of The Irishman, the culmination, the conclusion to this epic story of friendship, ego and betrayal, settles on a lonely old man in a wheelchair, staring at an open door, maybe hoping that someone, anyone, will walk through it and give him company in his final days. My second special mention is the "You're late" scene. the fiery confrontation between Jimmy Hoffa and Tony Pro, round 2. There's so much to love about this scene. It's funny and tense, and ultimately what gets you is the fact that it is such a petty contest between the two, such a display of fragile egos and juvenile behaviour, but the jests and funny lines, the best of which is Pacino's deadpan, "definitely," and him saying, "Your problem is you're a piece of shit," comes at a cost because Hoffa's failure to secure Pro's endorsement is ultimately the main beef of the film and what sends Hoffa down. And for what, really? In hindsight, you just think to yourself, why couldn't you just apologise and keep your mouth shut, Jimmy, and punish Pro once you were back in office? But then again, you can also see why Hoffa had had enough of the likes of Pro and other violent gangsters who did not represent the union in his eyes. And it's possible Pro never had any intention of endorsing Hoffa in the first place. Another one I want to quickly mention is the scene near the end where Frank talks to the two FBI agents. Throughout the final scenes of the film, they show us the FBI car without us knowing that it's the FBI, and then we see the car with no one sitting inside, and then the two cops sitting with Frank. I thought that was a nice touch, a nice little bit of visual storytelling to show us that Frank was constantly dogged by the FBI in his later life. But this is one of the most important scenes in the film, because it taps into Frank's morality, his adherence to his code, but that very adherence being pointless. Because as the FBI agent tells him, everyone is dead. Who is he protecting? What code are you following when you are the only one following it? And not only that, but Frank is lethargic in the old man Sheeran scenes. He's slow, distant, and not connected to this world around him, which has moved on from him. But there's a split second during his conversation with the FBI where they tell him that Frank Regano, his attorney, is dead. And he suddenly switches on, he suddenly becomes alert, he's back in the world he belongs, back in the saddle, someone's been whacked. Who did it, he asks. And then the punchline from the FBI guy, cancer. It's funny in a sick way, but also shows just what kind of world Frank lived in, where someone dying had to mean that someone had been killed. The concept of someone dying naturally, or any other way, didn't even enter his head. So on to the top 15 now. The last one on the list is one that I'm actually surprised I picked because it's more of a scene transition than a scene itself. But I took a fancy to the part where Frank Sheeran picks which gun he's going to use to take out Crazy Joe Gallo. One of my favourite things about the book, I Heard You Paint Houses, was the parts where Sheeran would take you through the more mundane and administerial aspects of being a hitman, where we pick up little details and tips, should we ever feel the need to start killing people for a living. There wasn't as much of this in the movie, but one scene where they go to town is in this scene, where Sheeran makes it like such an ordinary and normal thing, standing there in the room, staring at your guns, deciding which one is the best to kill someone. I loved the little reasons why he rejects most of the weapons, the little things like the noise and stuff, which highlights his experience, but it's also a visually very cool looking scene, and some people think of it as a throwback to the gun scene De Niro had in Scorsese's Taxi Driver. It's also pretty funny as well, when you think about it, because after Gallo disrespects Russ, and then Russ and Frank stare at each other, this scene follows, with no scene in between of Frank being told to kill Gallo. It's like he, as the narrator, and by extension director Martin Scorsese, is trusting his audience enough to know that we've spent enough time in this mob world to know that what Gallo did means death, and so they're not even going to bother explaining that Gallo needs to go. Next on the list is when we meet Angelo Bruno. You can feel the engine of the film slowly start to get going here. We briefly met Joe Pesci with young Frank, and here he is again, as Frank starts to meet more and more mob-connected characters. And then, who of all people should pop up, looking like an absolute badass, a top-tier first-rate gangster, Harvey Keitel, the original Martin Scorsese protagonist, in a Scorsese film for the first time in more than 30 years. You've got De Niro, Pesci, Keitel, the whole Scorsese gang is here, and you know that it's going to get even better because in a while, Al Pacino is going to show up. And then we get Pesci sitting down and greeting Keitel like an old friend, a remarkable moment in Scorsese's filmography, as this is the first time these two Scorsese veterans have ever been on screen together, a phrase you're probably going to hear a lot in this video. Keitel is such an intense presence. I love the fact that he has no lines in this scene but surveys and studies De Niro so fiercely. Maybe he's remembering the time De Niro shot him in Taxi Driver. We look at Keitel. We're told he's some big-time mob boss. There's a nice little jingle going on in the background, and then all of a sudden something weird happens. The film pauses. It stops. And we get a bizarre set of subtitles, the first of many in the film, telling us that Bruno, who has just become the boss of Philadelphia, is going to be brutally murdered in a few decades. It's a brilliant creative choice from Scorsese, never letting us get carried away with the grandeur and romance of the mob, reminding us always that death follows these people closely. It's eerie, just seeing those little death cards, as I refer to them, pop up because none of these people know what's coming for them. The next scene I've picked is where Sheeran and Bufalino break bread in prison. It makes such a startling contrast to the earlier scene in the film where De Niro and Pesci eat in the restaurant, mirroring it in almost every way except for the fact that the duo are so old now, and Pesci has had a stroke and can't even eat properly. It highlights the passage of time, a major theme of the movie, and something De Niro says later on in the film about not knowing how fast time goes by until you're there. Just a few hours ago, these guys were middle-aged men enjoying their food and getting to know each other. Now they're falling apart physically and mentally also, with grief and remorse over the things they have done to their mutual friend. The scene also has meta qualities to it as well, because of course it's like the film is waving goodbye to the legendary collaborative relationship between Robert De Niro and Joe Pesci. It's showing us that Jimmy Conway, Tommy DeVito, Sam Rothstein, Jake LaMotta, and all the wonderful, captivating characters that these two guys have played in Scorsese films over the years have finally gotten old, and very soon that table where they're sitting and eating is going to be empty. At number 12, I am picking Al Pacino's entrance in the film. When you're watching, you're thinking to yourself, this movie surely can't get any more star-studded. And then who's on the phone that Pesci hands to De Niro? Al Pacino. And it's almost like he knows we've been waiting an hour to see him, or waiting several decades to see him in a Scorsese picture, with a wry small smile as he speaks to Frank. Who's going to show up next? Marlon Brando. The film was quite slow up until this point as well, but Pacino fires it with energy, starting with the flashback scenes during the phone call, showing Hoffa do his business at rallies and union speeches, Pacino screaming and shouting and chewing up the scenery as we love to see him do. Solidarity! Pacino's delivery here is great as well, the way he acts with his voice. Like say, you've got a hint of genuine sadness and resentment when Hoffa says, you know they're trying to tear the union apart. Right from the off, we know the Teamsters union is so dear to Hoffa, it's his baby, which is very important for later scenes. At number 11, I've gone for a scene in which, in retrospect, I probably should have put higher. It's the scene between Bufalino and Sheeran when the former gives the latter a ring. Again, it's poignant not only because of the story, but because we're seeing two close actors, two close friends in De Niro and Pesci, sharing a compassionate scene with each other, which even includes a kiss and a bit of tearing up. In addition to this, it contains some outstanding acting, especially on De Niro's part as he swells with joy and gratitude at his gift, which is then struck down by his exasperation when told it's what it is. And somehow he must find a way to get Hoffa to step down. The frustration from him is paramount. The little wordless smile the two share is wonderful, and there's even a huge bonus in this scene of both De Niro and Pesci looking down the balcony and seeing Al Pacino and Harvey Keitel greet each other, the only time these two veteran actors have ever shared screen time in film history. I always felt that little 5-second scene was Scorsese indulging in the legendary status of the four main actors of the film, ensuring they all had at least one scene with each other. Anyway, the use of the music in the background from Silvio Dante is peak Scorsese, injecting so much splendor and majesty in this scene of two old geezers talking at a party. On to the top 10 now, and at number 10 I've gone for a scene which really doesn't have much significance, but I really enjoyed it for some reason, and it's Tony Pro's entrance. Scorsese has a knack for getting us involved in his story, and then introducing a new character along the way in such a way that you know, uh-oh, this guy's gonna be trouble. A bit like De Niro's Johnny Boy entrance in Mean Streets. Everything about this scene is on point, from the way Pacino and De Niro wearily talk about him before the scene. Remember when they were on about the little guy? And then the build up to him appearing, like he's a rock star appearing on stage. And then the absolute chaos and pandemonium from his supporters when he appears. And then that brilliant little anecdote about Pro killing one of his own men, cementing how dangerous and demented this guy is going to be. The scene where Three Fingers is killed is vintage Scorsese. I love the way the apparently non-diegetic funky music turns out is the song they're all listening to on the radio, and the way the guy driving puts the music back on nonchalantly whilst his passenger is being strangled to death and then put in a shredder, all to a beat that seems like it's out of a Mexican disco party. It's just brilliant. Fantastic direction and editing, a horrific depraved murder made to look like almost a sitcom style comedy scene. Plus, it's extra funny because watching the scene out of context would make you think Three Fingers got killed for touching the guy's radio. And it's so oxymoronic, so ironic, seeing Pro make a speech about the honest union man working whilst the corruption kings dedicate themselves to their destruction, which is pretty much what he's doing as a mobster, leeching off the honest working man's money. The choice of extras in Pro's entrance was on point. They really look like they're from the time period. The atmosphere is really different here from a lot of the Teamster scenes in the film, a lot more animalistic and even tribal, which should tell you something about this new character. Also, The Irishman is one of those films where very little is explained, meaning a lot of stuff is left up to interpretation. You've got a lot of shady looking guys here, one shot of an excited supporter having something whispered into his ear by a bit of a scary looking dude. The way I interpret this scene is that most of the genuine union guys are being coaxed, forced and threatened to keep drumming up the support for Pro by Pro's mob members who are in the union. Much of this scene, for the lack of a better word, is a sham. Number 9 now, and for this one I've gone for the Albert Anastasia hit, starting all the way from Joe Pesci talking to someone in the back of his shop, and simultaneously breaking the fourth wall and talking to us about expecting people to keep his instructions to themselves in a very clever shot, all the way to the aftermath of the hit, where De Niro tells us in a voiceover that Russell Bufalino was asked to calm things down. The point of this scene is to highlight Russell Bufalino's respect, reach and power, but Scorsese does it in such a way that it's incredibly self-indulgent, and I love it. It feels like the scene is made for his hardcore fans from movies like Goodfellas. There's no reason for this scene to exist. They don't even tell you who Anastasia is. They don't care if you don't know. This was one point in the film where I thought, you know what? I think Scorsese is just having a lot of fun here. So many of his trademarks are on display here. Breaking the fourth wall, the elongated tracking shot, the soundtrack dissonance. It's a very entertaining scene, completely unnecessary. The kind of scene that probably wouldn't make it to the final cut if this was released in cinemas, but really entertaining. Now for my next pick, I'm cheating quite a bit. To be honest, I've been cheating a bit already in this video, but here I've gone for the Hoffa hit itself, but not just the actual murder, but everything leading up to it, from the scene where Bufalino and Sheeran are in the kitchen. It's a remarkable set of scenes, so tense, with no music either. It's like a claustrophobic short film. I actually hate watching the Hoffa hit itself. I cringe watching it. It's so sad and heartbreaking, especially that little that Hoffa gives as he goes down, and the fact that he trusted Frank right up until the end. All throughout the scenes in this segment, like the cornflake scene, the aeroplane scene, the fish fiasco with Sally Bugs, and even the scene after the hit at the wedding, concluding with old man Frank saying, "It was no more complicated than that." De Niro's facial expressions and body language are remarkable. The way he's internalizing and pushing back the growing feelings of anxiousness and anxiety. The pain in his eyes when Joe Pesci tells him that Hoffa's going is stunning acting. There's such a range of emotions going on in Frank's mind, such a conflict that he knows he's being used to lure his close friend into a trap, but at the same time knows the man setting up the trap is protecting him. The simplicity of the entire thing is what gets you. No melodrama, no dramatic last exchange or heavy words. It's just like any other hit Frank did in his life. Efficient, cold and quick. At number 7, it's the scene where Frank Sheeran is scolded by mob boss Angelo Bruno with Russell Bufalino there as a witness and the reason why Frank wasn't outright killed for trying to blow up the laundromat. This scene is a pure orgasm for Scorsese fans because you've got 3 Scorsese veterans, 3 legends in the crime genre sitting there together around a table. And of all the people to dominate the scene with pure menace, it's perhaps the least appreciated of Scorsese's main actors, Harvey Keitel. I mean, it says something, doesn't it, that he's only in 3 scenes in the entire film, and all of those 3 scenes are in my top 15. He takes complete command of this scene, bleeding it with an ultra-serious and intimidating mood, with Frank Sheeran quickly changing his tone from horsing around about blowing up a building to quickly apologising and trying to de-escalate the situation. Props to Joe Pesci as well, seeing as though the mood changes are signalled by Russell's serious expression, pretty much telling Sheeran that you're in some deep shit. He's so powerful in this scene, it's easy to forget he doesn't even have any lines. This is really Harvey Keitel's only scene in the film, and it shows you just how much screen presence the guy has. His line delivery is excellent, his rebukes making this hitman look like a schoolboy, like when he says, "You got a good friend here, you don't know how good of a friend you got," and then De Niro says, "I know," but he won't even let him have that, and he says, "No, you don't know." The only thing that brings this scene down a little is the de-aging CGI on Joe Pesci looks a bit off. His face looks a bit plastered and the eyes look all weird and balloony, and it unfortunately hampers an otherwise great scene. There's also some classic mob humour with the confusion about who owns the laundry service, which provides a chuckle. That kind of realism, where in reality people have misunderstandings and brain farts, is what often separates Scorsese's films from other mob movies. One particular thing of importance with this scene is that it highlights that the problem of Jimmy Hoffa that happens later on was not just a feud between the likes of Bufalino, Hoffa, Pro and Fat Tony. There were other bosses in the stratosphere, hidden in the shadows, the higher ups as Bufalino puts it, and they are usually hidden away. Here is one scene where one is in the forefront of a scene, and no matter how old, skinny or ugly, the bosses have all the power in the mob. It also highlights the intelligence of a boss like Angelo Bruno, who ruled his family for 2 decades. He knows Frank is not the brains behind the operation, only the muscle, and he can be put to good use in the future, so acts accordingly, using the advice from Russell Bufalino. At number 6, I've gone for Frank Sheeran trying to get Jimmy Hoffa to understand the situation at Frank Sheeran's appreciation night. In truth, the entire appreciation night is my favourite scene in the film, but it would be too easy to pick the entire thing. One of the best things about the appreciation night is the phenomenal acting on display, and here is a perfect example. When De Niro says, "It's what it is," Pacino's reaction is just legendary. You can see how it hits him so hard, that little expression that says, "How could they? How ludicrous?" Perhaps even with a hint of fear and understanding of how far things have come and how much danger he is in, before quickly ego retakes over and he repeats, "They wouldn't dare. They wouldn't dare," almost like he's challenging the mob. All the while, De Niro is getting more and more exasperated, more and more desperate to make Hoffa understand. Pacino is on fire here, but you really do feel for De Niro as well, caught in the middle. The way he's even trying to shush Hoffa, not even let him utter the things he is saying, and sighing resignedly at Hoffa's going on about tapes and proofs, knowing that the mob doesn't care about Hoffa's tapes. He just cannot get through to Hoffa, much as he tries, and he knows the consequences are dire. You also get a sense of Hoffa's ownership and love for the union, repeating, "This is my union," and that, simple as it is the reason why he won't give up the union he's worked so hard for, that he launched into the stratosphere for parasitic greaseball mobsters. The top 5 now, and I'm going for the scene where Pacino is sitting in a room full of fucking idiots. This part of the film is so funny, watching Pacino go to town on his workers, and the hilarious way De Niro gets offended and walks out, and Pacino has to stop his tirade to convince Frank to come back. This scene is vintage Pacino. It harks back to the 1990s, where Pacino could not go one film without exploding at a bunch of characters. It's one of his most famous traits, and The Irishman here is seemingly providing a bit of fan service at watching Al Pacino provide the kind of verbal smackdown we love to see him do. The scenery chewing here hits the roof. He's given so much freedom here and is so wild, you'd think Scorsese's only direction was, okay, another take, but this time, could we tone it down like 10 notches? But it's not just Al Pacino screaming. His line delivery is pretty brilliant, to be honest. The comedic timing, the way his tirade is so high-pitched, and then he instantly switches to a lower, I'm going to jail, you understand? So quickly. There's also genuine frustration in his voice when he's going on about Kennedy. You can see that it's getting to him. He sounds so angry, he looks like he's going to choke on his own words and cry. This is one of the reasons why Scorsese and Pacino should have found a way to work together during the prime of their careers. Scorsese is notorious for providing a little direction and then leaving his actors to improvise, and Pacino is famous for doing this. They fit like a glove together. You can't tell me half of what Pacino did in this scene was in the script. I love the way he kept saying, his fucking fathers, and then just stops, leans on his desk and smiles, almost like he's just lost the will to live, momentarily doesn't care about anything anymore and is living in bliss because he can't handle the stupidity in the room, and then gets right back into it after the little break. Some people even feel that what Pacino did there was so unorthodox that he actually forgot his lines and then carried on after he remembered. Number 4 now, and again it's a bit of cheating because it's multiple scenes, more of a montage than anything else, but it's the part after the Hoffa hit, where everyone starts going down, as Sheeran tells us that everyone starts getting killed off or arrested. This is where the chickens come home to roost in the film, and coupled with the fantastic eerie score, it almost feels like the angel of death is coming for everyone who was involved in the hit, that they're all being punished for their crime. Starting off with De Niro being questioned in court, all the way to him telling us he went to prison because of his car bribe thing. This is where the film transitions from the 1970s timeline to when they're all old, and it does so in such stylish fashion, but it's so quick as well, linking to the film's theme of the quick passing of time. It's like this is a compilation of outstanding little scenes from the film, all bunched up together. You've got the little rerun of the Three Fingers murder, just to remind us why Tony Pro went to prison, the Sally Bugs murder, containing very dark humour with his death being a bad hit, highlighting the lack of value of life in the mob. The scene where Pesci gets arrested is brilliant also. The part where he tells Jimmy the Weasel to kill a guy without actually telling him to kill the guy contains some really sinister, low-key acting from him. And then finally you have the scene at the car wash, where Sheeran tells us why he went down. See, it's just a showcase of just how creative Scorsese is. Even the little subtitles that pop up on the screen, like when it tells us how Angelo Bruno, Tony Jack and others died, here they're used for information as before, but also comedic effect, with De Niro saying they pulled him up on some small charges and other bullshit, and then we see what they actually brought him in for, and it's practically a laundry list of horrific crimes, including murder and attempted murder. And the scene with the car wash is, in terms of creativity, there's so many ways the film could have told us Sheeran went to prison, but Scorsese just oozes creativity, and he decides to give us this beautiful slow motion scene of the car being washed. There's also a bit of subtle visual storytelling going on here as well, with De Niro's car having a Where's Hoffa badge, suggesting he was part of the crews that would look for Hoffa, which of course would have played with his feelings of guilt and remorse because he's actively pretending to look for someone he's already killed. Top 3 now, and in third place I've gone for De Niro's best acted scene in the movie, which is shortly after the Hoffa hit where he phones up Hoffa's wife. I've spoken about this scene a lot in other videos. It is simply a mesmerizing display of talent, and the man goes through about 20 different emotions and facial expressions. If the grocery shop scene was a 1 out of 10 from De Niro, this is an 11 out of 10. It's one of the best acted scenes of his career, one that makes your gut clench. It's so powerful and emotional, and it's all without any directorial aid. It's just De Niro's raw acting, right up there with scenes like his prison breakdown in Raging Bull. It's a scene that I could not stop thinking about the very first time I watched the film. The guilt, the confusion, the pain, knowing he's lying to Joe, knowing it isn't going to be alright when he says it is, and you can see it taking more of a toll on him as the phone call goes on, and he just wants to end the call. At one point, if you listen carefully, he almost says he's in a better place, almost giving it away that Hoffa's dead. For my number 2 pick, in terms of Frank Sheeran Appreciation Night, I've already done Pesci and De Niro and Pacino. And here I am, picking the scene between Hoffa and Bufalino, the only time the two old associates are face to face in the film, as Bufalino tries to get Hoffa to step down. I still remember being in a state of bliss when I was at the cinema watching this. I could not fathom that I was seeing the two legendary actors, Al Pacino and Joe Pesci, in the same film, in the same scene, talking to each other, arguing with each other. It was almost surreal. Both are veterans of the crime genre and both often play loudmouth midgets in gangster films, but to see them together was so weird. It was like Clash of the Titans, two crime movie legends finally coming face to face. And if anyone had any reservations about Al Pacino playing the irate Jimmy Hoffa, and the usually profanity-fueled maniac Joe Pesci playing the calm and collected Russell Bufalino, this scene of them both together shows you why they were perfect choices. Pacino's acting here is just spellbinding, stunning. He out-Pesci's Joe Pesci. The sheer hatred in his voice when he talks about Tony Pro, when he talks about the two's time in prison, and the line about wanting to finish his ice cream sounds ludicrous. I mean, the guy is complaining about wanting to sit and eat his ice cream to a mob boss who's thinking about killing him, but Pacino delivers it with such venom, such genuine animosity. The scene could have been, in danger of coming off as a little too self-righteous, but Pesci's reaction when he gives that little snort and smile brings it back down to earth and shows us that he's on the same page as us. When Pesci says that some people think Hoffa's not showing appreciation, that little face that Pacino makes for a split second always gets me. I don't know why, there's something about it, the way he did it. What can you say? It's just fantastic. I remember making a video on that 1 second when the movie's trailer came out more than a year ago. It's like he's saying in that 1 second, "Oh, come on, what are you talking about? I'm not showing appreciation?" And then the absolute anger and rage that takes over him. The way he chews on each word, saying 15 minutes late. This scene is perfection on celluloid. The actors, the acting, the dialogue, the music, the tension, the set, the colours. It was such a treat to see these two go head to head. And at number 1, it might be a surprising choice because at face value it's such a minor little part. But it's again at Frank Sheeran Appreciation Night, and it's the part where Hoffa and Peggy are dancing to that wonderful music. Everything is beautiful and lovely, and then the camera quickly turns and shows the three mobsters, Pro, Salerno and Bufalino, looking directly at Hoffa and talking about killing him, perhaps even making the decision right there and then. They look so sinister. Pesci looks like such a boss, and Hoffa is completely oblivious. Only Peggy notices Bufalino, this quiet old man who always wanted her to call him Uncle Ross. Look at him now. Look how dangerous this man is. And he's one of the men responsible for killing Hoffa, who she was so close to and looked up to, more so than her own father. In a way, it seems like the Spanish Eyes music is saying goodbye to Hoffa. Look how happy the two are together, smiles galore. And the soundtrack here says, "Please smile for me once more before I go." The scene is just perfect. The sweet music contrasts so heavily with the foreboding feeling. Even the quick camera movement, which seems at such odds with everyone dancing slowly. There's just something about this shot. It always gets me. It's my favourite shot from the entire 3.5 hour film. So there you have it. My top 15 favourite scenes in The Irishman. Let me know what yours are in the comments below. And thanks for watching.